Yeah, we don't do the
The countdown.
countdown. No. Um, I'm gonna wait till we get over here. Let me know when y'all see the live feed. I've got this little gnat running around here. All
Hey,
right.
right now it has more views than you have followers.
Huh?
Part one
Oh,
has
cool.
more views than you have followers.
All right. All right. He says we're live. All right. So here we go. Because on my computer, I'm not showing us live yet, but whatever. All right, guys. We're here. We're going to be doing part two. Kind of where we left off. Part one is that we were basically through the first day in February of the standoff, and basically the ATF had been in charge of that fiasco, spent all their bullets, basically to no avail, and they were packing it in. Obviously, they have dead and wounded, um, and it's just a major fiasco. We went through some of the uh, video. We're going to go through the rest of the video clips and then we're going to talk about it. We had discovered that there were military illegally involved in Waco out of Fort Hood, that they had used government facilities at Fort Hood for their planning sessions, and that Colonel Boykin at the time, he ends up getting promoted, of course, and General Schumacher, who very big, well-known guy in special forces in SOF, is involved in Washington, D.C., and apparently on the ground in Waco when we get to April 19th, as you fast forward through the standoff. But they were intimately involved in the military with as military representatives in the planning in Washington, D.C. of this raid. So, or how they were basically going to settle it after the fact. We made it very well known that David Koresh, in going through his history, traveled extensively internationally. He was coming and going all the time. So if he was a wanted criminal under an indictment of some type for weapons trafficking, illegal firearms, how did he travel internationally? How did he get on an airplane? How did he move around? He literally, people that weekend that they raided him, were participating in gun shows repeatedly. They had a gun license to sell firearms. So they were coming and going out of there all the time. He knew that the people that lived near the compound were informants. He went and drank with them at a bar. So there is no reason whatsoever, if all their intentions were to deliver a warrant, that any of what happened should have happened. Why would you, your first time going to serve a warrant, would you have an entire array of firearms? Why would you bring agents in 2 cattle cars to bail out and assault the compound to deliver a warrant?
One of the things that was brought up at trial was that they claimed that would be coming in undercover, and if they were under heavy fire, the tarps on those cattle trailers would not have protected them. If they were truly violent groups,
Correct.
They would have wiped them down before or as they piled out of these cattle cars.
Right. They were not in armored vehicles. They came in in a metal cattle car with a tarp over it. 2 of them. There was no fear that they were going to be fired on, or that's not how they would have arrived. Okay, so I am going to see if I can keep up my track record here on being able to work this video. So we are at all right, we just finished that clip. So now I want to go to 16 right there. All right.
Tired of what to drag on like this. I mean, either give them an ultimatum, give them a deadline.
When I first was asked to be involved as a member of the panel, I thought the main problem was going to be understanding the psychology of the people inside the compound. But as I got into it, I quickly became aware that the psychology of the people outside the compound was more important to an understanding of happening.
They were mooning the women, for instance. They would drop their pants and bend over and bare their rear end to people that were looking out the windows, which was, not a situation that some of the women or even some of the men took too lightly, in the sense, well, do we want to send our children out to these kind of people?
Steve, every time we're aware of movement, we've told you about controlling these guys. I mean, if you got guys out there right now pulling their pants down, men that are mature, they're sticking their butts out in the air and flipping the finger. Give me a moment. See, right. The guys that gravitate toward riding in tanks, jumping out of airplanes and stuff like that are a little different mindset than you and I. I agree with you. Right? I agree. So when they get a chance to use a Bradley, probably half of them have never been in a Bradley before. It reminded me of a lot of kids in there. Absolutely. An opportunity to, hey, let's drive this baby and see how it works. Sure, but somebody's got to be above these guys. Well, those vehicles and what they're doing do not show what is coming out of the mouths of some of you guys.
Let me give you an example. Now that you brought this up, we had a burial for one of the people out front. Peter Gent was buried out front, and the tanks ran over his grave over and over and over again, just totally.
So this gives you a depiction of the caliber of people that are representing our government on site, pulling their pants down, flipping the people off inside, while at the same time the hostage rescue team is trying to convince people to come out to these same people. That's where we're at. All right. Let me fast forward a little bit here.
Crazy and start shooting so that they'd have an excuse to gun us down. We didn't know.
We realize that you have the ability, and it's not below you people to do something like to erase all evidences. Why do you have the press so far back? You can give me any kind of crap you want. I know, you know. The reason we're not talking to the press is you people have got to cover your butts from what you did, and that's what's going on here.
And at one point, the FBI asked them, do they have fire extinguishers? And Schneider sends someone to check and comes back with the report that there's only one fire extinguisher in the building. The FBI negotiator's response is, somebody ought to buy some fire insurance.
The question is, will we permit a pool camera up close? Any closer than you are? We did. We went down the road. We stopped at the place where you could still see the compound. That was not accidental. We made sure that you could still see the compound. We could have moved you where you don't have any sight. We didn't do that. And the reason we don't want a camera there is they watch television and they watch us approach if we do anything. We're not going to assault the place. But anything we do around there to get control, that is precisely why you can't have a camera there. Okay?
In Waco, where they're weary of the standoff, DJ JR is giving residents a lift by actually doing what the FBI only joked about.
One person was recommending we play Achy Breaky Heart continuously.
It's like a big carnival, really.
So you get the idea that the guy that's talking there just before this frame was the on-site FBI guy that was in charge. And they're making it clear that the people inside understand exactly what's going on. And the media was kept far enough away from the activities that they were unable to see what was actually going on, because things like them pulling their pants down and stuff like that was going on. So they weren't going to let them anywhere near to be able to have a good view of what was going on. So let me move on to right here.
Who would you like to have here when you guys come out? Who would you like to invite? No. Boy, you've got rocks in your ears, Dick. Okay, explain to me. I'm sorry. You're saying when we come out. I'm talking about right now. Let's get somebody in between us right now to do some negotiating.
We have a woman who believes in her heart and soul that she can get her grandson to lay down his arms and come out.
Well, I'm his grandmother, and he's my grandson. All my grandchildren are good kids because I've taught them well.
This is Gresh's grandmother.
And so I approached and told him that I was there, and I'd like to speak to the agent in charge, and that I was a lawyer, and I had David Cresh's grandmother with me, and I wanted to see about talking to him. And after a few minutes, another one came up to me who was obviously the guy in charge and was very surly. Declined to give me any information at all. So I started to leave, and just as I left and turned my back and started walking toward my van, I heard a voice say, coming from one of those people, I don't know which one, but one of them said, I hope she has told him goodbye. That was the mentality of the people who were guarding the gates. Those were federal law enforcement authorities.
So you can see they're already talking as if the people in there are dead. Let me get to the next clip.
Prophecies were not being fulfilled now, and that this would be resolved.
People don't understand how important that was. David Koresh and his people believed that God's message for our generation could not be written and should not be written. And David Koresh had never before written down his ideas. He believed that he had received a message from God saying, now, David, write. Before I told you not to, now I'm telling you you can.
He waited 51 days, and then he said, the word came to him and said, write, and he wrote. This was brought out the day of the fire by one of the survivors. He was keeping his promise of April 14th. We believe they would have all come out safely.
This was pulled out of the fire, the tapes were, and then this was written up as evidence that he was working on that message on the 7 seals.
All they had to do was say, we've got a disc, we're going to be sending it out. When the FBI advised me of their plan and the possibility of the insertion of gas, I did notify the White House counsel, and I kept in contact through the White House counsel. I'm sure the White House counsel advised the president.
We're missing some of your telephone logs, particularly April 17th, 18th, and 19th, and our problem is that they've all been redacted. And is there any chance that we could get those?
I can't be helpful. Nobody's ever asked me, but I have a copy of these same logs, and you're welcome to them as far as I'm concerned. Except, I have to tell you, the 17th and 18th were Saturday and Sunday, and so therefore there wouldn't be any. These are basically logs of people who called and left a message for me to call them back. Not necessarily everybody I talked to.
What I was faced with was a situation where the negotiators said We think we have reached an impasse. Nobody else is coming out voluntarily. We looked at the entire situation and we made the best judgment we could. I'm very satisfied that in the information furnished to me by the FBI, I was informed.
Do you know if Attorney General Reno was ever advised that there was this new development before she made her decision?
I don't know because I doubt it because it was not from our understanding of it. And the judgment was looking at what they were doing. Maybe that she was not. I don't know, but there wasn't any reason to because it was not a serious plan. It was just another delaying tactic.
The FBI testified before the House hearings that the negotiations had reached an impasse. They told the Attorney General they weren't coming out and that there was a stalling tactic and they weren't working on the 7 seals. Their own negotiators had reached an agreement knowing that the first seal was finished and in order to get proof of it had sent in typewriter ribbons so that they could get that proof in their hands, and yet the very next morning they launched the gassing.
This is initially.
David, individuals inside the Branch Davidian compound now. We are in the process of placing tear gas into the building. This is not an assault. This is not an assault.
So let me clarify this. As they're assaulting the building and knocking holes in the wall, they keep repeating, this is not an assault, as they're assaulting the building.
Fire. Everybody grab your mask. Everybody grab your mask.
The gas supplies a number of irritants to the nostrils, to the eyes, to the skin. Just touching to the skin can be extremely painful. You can have certain symptoms of nausea. You can have certain symptoms of inflammation with regard to the membranes. So it is extremely uncomfortable.
Boot camp trainees are briefly exposed to a mild amount of CS for a few seconds. The Davidians received more than 10 times that dosage for more than 6 hours. CS isn't a gas, it's a chemical powder. At Waco, the CS powder was dissolved in methylene chloride, a volatile chemical used for stripping paint. Together, they formed an aerosol mist when sprayed through huge steel injectors fitted onto the tanks. In closed spaces, CS alone can cause unconsciousness, death, and can be ignited by a spark into a fireball. When CS burns, it produces hydrogen cyanide, the same gas used in prison gas chambers.
Did you tell the Attorney General that infants would not die or be harmed?
I told her there is no increased sensitivity to the effects of CS on infants, young adults, and older people.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. There she goes. Bye-bye.
I believe that using CS gas against infants, against old people with respiratory problems, there were 60, 70-year-old men in there, and there were young children. That's torture. And I can just see those kids barfing, vomiting, screaming, because you can't possibly have a gas mask that'll fit a little kid.
Didn't their report say that gas masks don't fit on these babies?
That's correct.
And didn't they know that?
They should have known that.
We will not be entering the building. This is not an assault.
They explained to me that they were pouring fuel and that they were making Molotov cocktails to throw at the tanks. Now, they never did throw Molotov cocktails at the tanks. The conversation about that takes place in the early morning hours, 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning. The fire didn't start until right around noon.
If you come out now, you will not be harmed. Come out with your hands up, carrying nothing. You are under arrest and stand on.
Shortly
after they started, they began also not only spraying it from the CVs off of the booms, but they started firing ferret rounds on the excuse. Of course, we learned later that we were supposed to be firing at them.
What did you feel? What were your emotions?
Well, we definitely weren't believing what we were hearing over the loudspeakers, that they were not entering the building or this was not an attack. You know, we were told they weren't going to be shooting, and yet they're firing what amounted to mortars or rockets at us, these ferret rounds, which sounded like a mortar.
Were you afraid?
Yes.
Experts say the ferrets, or barricade-penetrating cartridges, that were used are non-pyrotechnic or non-incendiary. They introduce CS gas in a vapor form as the tip disintegrates. But experts also say the ferrets pack enough force to kill someone with a direct hit. Empty ferret boxes found on the compound grounds warn against firing the rounds at people. Despite that warning, agents fired ferrets into every window of the compound, and according to the review, any movement inside was targeted.
With respect to the use of military weapons, these pieces of equipment were unarmed, as I understand it, and were contracted. I mean, it was like a good rent-a-car. They were
a good rent-a-car, a tank going into a building.
At 9 o'clock, Attorney General Reno left the command center at FBI headquarters to give a speech in nearby Baltimore. From then on, Waco decisions were made by top officials of the FBI and the Clinton administration.
4 minutes into the raid, it escalates. The 48-hour plan, according to the testimony, is gone. We're now going to do a massive insertion of gas into every window. Did you consider staying in Washington, D.C., given that escalation 4 minutes into the plan?
During the course of the morning, the question arose whether I should cancel the speech, and the FBI did not want me to do so because they thought it would attract attention. If I suddenly canceled a speech, it looked like there would be an emergency.
One of the most inadequate parts of the Justice Department's report is their failure to describe the decision-making process at the command post. I think that is unpardonable.
So what they're basically saying at this point, obviously, is that this is not an emergency. We just inserted, and by the way, it's later proven that that was pyrotechnic gas, flammable gas. It was not non-flammable. Those cartridges will be dug out of a storage locker stored in Texas under the lock and key of the Texas Rangers several years from now, from the event. And a lawyer lost his law license and was convicted basically of withholding information not because he was the only one that withheld this information. He's the one that actually told on them for withholding the information. But when he submitted his notes, he had tore the page out where they were all briefed because they were all set up. This is how they work. So let me explain this real quick since we just watched this. When they brought the U.S. attorneys into the CIA headquarters, and they were briefed on what happened. And they were briefed on the fact that there was military pyrotechnic devices used. So they're busily jotting notes down. It doesn't mean anything to them because they said military grade. They didn't say that it was pyrotechnic or flammable. So they don't even know what they're writing down. But because it's now in their notes, they're not now culpable for having that information. So fast forward, they keep getting told by the FBI, the U.S. Attorneys get told by the FBI that it's non-flammable, it's non-flammable, it's non-flammable. They testify in court, it's non-flammable. All of that was a lie. They knew at the time, as weapons experts that it was flammable. The only people that didn't really know were the attorneys. They're not prior military. They didn't have any idea what they were doing. So they showed a picture of the guy's little Bridget, if you can mute that, if you wouldn't mind,
Sorry.
there's echo. That's okay.
Okay.
They show a picture of his little notes where it actually says that over in the corner, and no one going back over, 50 pages of notes is going to notice that little scribble over in the side or even remember the comment being made, because it was a couple of days worth of meetings that they went to be debriefed by all of this. And so again, it's a setup. So if any one of them were to rat out the rest of them, they would all have it in their notes. So they're going to go after whoever did it. So the one guy that decided to do it was the U.S. attorney in San Antonio. And he basically says, hey, this isn't right. You guys, thinking he didn't realize at the time that it was him. But he says, these other people over here knew that. And then he started looking back through his notes, and he also realized he knew it too. So what he did was he tore that page out of his notebook, which of course is not legal, and sent in his notebook. And then what they did was they basically indicted him, not the rest of the people that all was in on it. They indicted him for tearing that piece of paper out, and he got in trouble and lost his law license. That's the way our government works. So it's important to understand that. And they knew from the time they put this in that it was going to be flammable. And we're going to hear later on that the reason why it the long period of time between them doing this and the actual fire is because it wasn't until just before the fire starts that they shot in additional flashbangs that actually ignited the gas that they just put in. And they knew this. So let me get to our next clip.
There's nothing in the investigation of what was going on in the Washington command post, where they had a situation room, which was supposedly constantly in touch with Waco. What were the communications that went on? What were the decisions made? And that we have never heard.
Dozens and dozens of rounds have been fired at FBI agents. The FBI, in an effort to demonstrate its extraordinary restraint, has not returned fire thus far.
Okay, so now they're telling you that the FBI has not returned fire. I just showed you video of what the FBI has been doing. They are destroying that house. They're inserting tear gas. Who is available to return fire on them? No one. They're not being shot at. They are destroying the compound. They're gassing the people inside the compound. And this guy has the audacity to say they haven't returned fire. They haven't been fired on.
Almost 2 miles above Mount Carmel, a surveillance plane was photographing events on the ground with a forward-looking infrared camera, commonly called by its acronym, FLIR. Edward Allard helped develop the FLIR. He's a former manager of the Defense Department's Night Vision Laboratory and holds several patents on FLIR and night vision technology. Allard explains what happens as a tank approaches the rear of Mount Carmel around 11:16 a.m. That's the side the news cameras couldn't see.
Thermal imagery is not the same as black and white imagery. Even though we're going to see images that look like it's black and white television cameras, it is not. This type of imagery is the same type of imagery that was used by our armed forces in Desert Storm. The bright spots in this particular film are spots that are hot. The gray area are warm, we'll say, and the black areas are cool. They're relatively cool. They're still pretty warm for a Texas midday, but they're a lot cooler than the rest of the surrounding area. If you look carefully, what you will see is the exhaust plume of the tank. You'll see the plume twice when the operator steps on the gas. There it is again. And now what you will see is a short burst there. That short burst, we feel is a gunshot. The next view is a view in slow motion. As the vehicle approaches, we see the plume from the engine, and we have the gunshot. Now, freeze it there, please. You can see now the outline of the tank. You can clearly see the outline of the tank. There's the blade. There's the blade in front of the tank. There's the opposite side of the tank. This hot area back here is the engine, the deck area. And it appears that the shot that we're looking at is coming off the rear deck area of the tank. This particular one, the burst lasted about 1 second. And we will see shots similar to this throughout the tape, and nothing else appears with the type of thermal signature that we get of gunshots.
Did the FBI fire one shot, even one shot at the Davidian compound?
Not throughout the entire standoff.
Now let me say something here. We already know now, because we're obviously a lot farther removed from this. When he asked, did the FBI do it? There are 2 4-person SEAL teams, not SEAL teams, sorry. Hold on. Delta teams that are present here. They are in a military vehicle.
What we're going to see here is what could be called an infantry tank maneuver. We notice the tank. This is the tank smashing into the building. And we'll also see gunfire, multiple gunfire, on the outside of the tank to the rear of the tank.
It just went into
Right now, we're seeing a close-up view of exactly the same thing. The important thing to notice is the gunfire, multiple rounds being fired from at least 2 different positions. And it's about 10 bursts in approximately 2 to 3 seconds. And according to our calculations, it indicates that both positions are firing automatic weapons. There is nothing in nature that would duplicate these type of thermal signatures, primarily because of the short duration of the bursts themselves. Nothing in nature could do that.
And I'll remind the American people one more time that during that entire time, those 6 hours, and indeed those 51 days, the FBI never fired one shot at the Davidians.
That's the guy that was in charge. He was the on-scene commander, and he's a liar.
What we're going to see now is rapid fire in the courtyard right behind the dining room area. And you can see the fire going on, but it's difficult to see in real time. Now the slow motion shows things much more clearly. There are 2 positions. We look at the tape carefully. There are 2 positions, and it apparently, by the signature itself of the burst, apparently is going from this area here into the dining room area.
And that's where all the people were.
What Allard saw was verified in an independent FLIR analysis done by Infraspection Institute for CBS 60 Minutes. Quote, "It was obvious to me on several occasions that there was gunfire or automatic weapons discharge seemingly fired toward the building from the outer perimeter," end quote. A second letter from Infraspection Institute states the fear that kept 60 Minutes from informing the American people. Quote, "Due to the potentially sensitive nature of this material and the resulting negative repercussions to Infraspection, we are choosing to decline any further comments surrounding this taped incident and our subsequent professional opinion regarding its viewing," end quote. In addition to noticing the gunfire, Infraspection saw something else. Quote, "There were occasions on the video that seemed to appear as though people were entering, exiting, or being run over by an armored vehicle," end quote.
The whole idea here was not to hurt people, right?
That is correct.
Okay, I want to focus on that building right there and on that corner. You see it's now structurally sound. Would you go to the next photo? We're now looking kind of from the front corner. These are taken from the airplanes. You will see that where he is pointing, that section of the building is gone. Indeed, a great portion of the building is gone.
There was a discussion that there may come a point in this where we would try to poke holes in the building. My understanding...
I understood that.
Yes, sir.
This I don't see as a whole.
No, I understand that. Yes, sir. And I do not believe that there were any bodies found in that area.
The closest bodies were found a little further in. Each one of those 5 bodies, it's reported, had extensive, according to the autopsy report, extensive body mutilation.
Davidian Stephen Henry had a gunshot wound through his chest. His leg was sheared off at the hip.
Like it was run over.
James Riddle had been shot too, but a large circular portion of the right side of his chest had also been ripped out of his body. Riddle's red shirt was dangling from his wrist. His nearby coat had a red lining. This gunfire occurred at 11:24 a.m. About 10 minutes later, something got jammed near the tank's front wheel that caused the tread to come off. Something that was mostly red. The available evidence indicates that could be James Riddle's body. To attach the disabled tank to a retriever and tow it away, men had to expose themselves to the gunfire FBI officials said was coming from the Davidians.
This is one of these things, Mr. Chairman, that nags at you. Damage to the tanks, common sense tells me, would be reflected in the damage report. Almost 2 months ago, we requested it. Over 2 years have elapsed since this occurred. Surely the damage report had been compiled. I realize the wheels of bureaucracy turn awfully slowly in this town, but after 2 years...
I'll be glad to look into it and see what we can produce.
So I want to bring your attention to where it says FBI bug. So this entire day, there have been people, and it may say this later on, but we've watched several videos of this. There were people from the federal government coming into this building during the day. There were listening devices that were distributed throughout the Davidian complex. So that's why it just said FBI bug there.
As the gassing continued, the women and children went to the safest place left inside Mount Carmel, the kitchen storage room, a first-floor steel-reinforced concrete room, a former vault at the bottom of the square wooden tower.
Women and children ended up going in there, and because they didn't have gas masks and stuff, they were covering themselves with wet blankets and wet towels and things like that.
We knew that that protection was in there. We believe we finally were able to make entry into that compound and were able to insert gas inside that protective area.
So somebody, one of these Delta guys or one of the FBI guys goes into the building on top of that concrete vault, and they place a detonation charge on top of it and blow a hole in it so that they know now the gas will get to the women and children that are in the bunker.
They actually drove right through the middle of the building into the kitchen area, basically at point blank range, fired gas into the concrete room where the women and children were. In a cul-de-sac like that where there was no ventilation, they must have been going through.
There was only one door.
Front, yeah. There's no windows, no back door or anything like that.
We put massive gas in there. Their gas mask by that time had to be failing.
They would be coughing, choking. They would probably be unconscious. Some of them would probably be dead. Some would be basically inert. They may still be alive. They may still be breathing, but they're not going to be doing anything.
In planning very large actions of this sort, like going in at the building, you do a lot of planning, like if this happens, then this, we'll do this. And if this happens, then we'll do this, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you consider that fire might well occur in this instance? And if it does, we do this?
Yes, sir. We did.
By noon, Mount Carmel was a tinderbox. A heavy layer of dried CS dust coated everything inside. Large amounts of kerosene and Coleman fuel from containers crushed by armored vehicles saturated the floor. Vapors from methylene chloride, kerosene, and Coleman gas filled the air. Huge holes ripped open by the tanks let the 25-mile-per-hour Waco wind blow completely through Mount Carmel.
When the governmental agency made a decision to breach holes into the building, they set up a configuration of a pot-bellied stove. You wanted to burn slow, you close off the vents. If you wanted to burn fast, you open it up. Well, they made a configuration in that building that was consistent to a pot-bellied stove. Any type of fire that would start, even if there was no CS gas, if there was no flammable liquids, there was nothing, just ordinary combustible materials. Once you have a fire incipient in a building like that, it's going to grow to a fast, rapid propagation because of the venting.
At this front corner, a combat engineering vehicle has just made its last injection of CS. That small black dot is the nozzle tip. ice cold from the carbon dioxide propellant used to force the methylene chloride CS mixture into the building. Less than a minute later, the first of 3 separate fires that started in 3 separate locations within a 3-minute period began here on the 2nd floor, while the fresh mixture is at its most volatile as a fine mist.
Once ignited, both the CS and the methylene chloride will become involved in the fire and add to the fire. Those sources will tend to produce a fireball or a flash fire.
2 Branch Davidian survivors say they saw fireballs. Shortly after fresh CS was injected at this corner, the FLIR shows a second tank that's pulling away. As the corner comes into view, a fire is burning there. David Thibodeau said he was here and saw a fireball that ran the front length of Mount Carmel, possibly igniting another fire here in the kitchen dining room area, right next to the concrete room where the women and children had been gassed earlier. About a minute after the front fireball Thibodeau saw, another armored vehicle drives up to the rear of the crushed gymnasium and also pulls away. A few seconds later, survivor Derek Lovelock says a fireball raced from the rear of Mount Carmel to the front, igniting everything in its path.
At this point, the back of the gym was thoroughly destroyed, and it greatly disturbed me. At that point, I'd lost all hope. At 12 o'clock, someone yelled from the upstairs that there was a fire. The front, I could not get to the front because of what the tanks had come in, the stairwell that was closest to the front, so I went to the stairwell in the back. Because I'm thinking the kids, I'm thinking Serenity C. Jones, I was thinking of Isaiah and Joseph, some of these kids that I've come to know and love. I get up there, and there was a catwalk that was leading over the rafters of the church area. I walked to the front, I got to a blanket, I opened the blanket up, and a wall of flame shoots down the hallway in front of my face down to the other end of the building. It was the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. I'm a drummer. And it was incredibly loud. I could not hear anything else other than this flame.
Well, do you know personally how the fire started?
No.
The place is beginning to fill up with black smoke, and me and Scott were stood there by the stairs, and there was this kind of ball of fire with a tremendous heat, which caused us to jump back out of the way. And it came from across. It came as if it came from the gym area across this way.
It's believed the fireball Derek Lovelock said he saw started here with this flash.
That flash was so bright that the operator of the FLIR thought it was so significant that he decided to fix his cursor in that area to remind him or other people looking at the tape that there was a very significant flash in the window. When we see it in slow motion and we see the flash, it appears to be a single flash, but it is not a single flash. It's actually 2 flashes. We got a primary flash and a secondary flash, and both of these flashes last about 1/2 second each. And they're most likely detonations inside the building itself.
Now, if some of you just saw this flash here, that is a momentary event. In my opinion, that's a reflection due to sunlight reflecting off some object in that debris.
So the fire guy says that that's sunlight coming out of the end of a tank.
Light reflections would show up as a flash on regular film which records light. But reflections don't generate enough heat, say specialists like Allard, to create a flash on infrared. Infraspection analysts noticed the same flash. Quote, a portion of the video showed a flash or pyrotechnic explosion in one portion of one of the buildings. End quote.
The FBI made it clear from the beginning it used nothing that could have started a fire.
Non-pyrotechnic delivery systems were utilized to insert CS gas.
Pyrotechnic devices actually burn, and as they do, tear gas is dispersed.
This pyrotechnic projectile is one of two found in the rubble of Mount Carmel. It's a 40-millimeter military device that's fired from a handheld grenade launcher. This one was found here, near the corner of Mount Carmel where the first fire started. The other was found here, in the kitchen dining room area.
And notice they said they were military.
20 seconds after the two gymnasium flashes, still more automatic gunfire can be seen coming from the field to the left of the demolition tank.
We counted the number of gun flashes, and in this particular case, we got 6 flashes in 1 second, which indicates it's a rapid fire weapon of some kind. And we also can see from the tapes that the fire is going in this direction towards the gymnasium where we saw the flash in the window.
Is when the fire did start and the fire trucks did arrive, I didn't let them in. I held them at the checkpoint because I didn't want the firemen to drive into gunfire. I just wasn't going to permit it. And it's a terrible thing, a very terrible decision to have to make. But it didn't hesitate. It took me that 2 seconds to make it. But we held the fire trucks. So that was.
There has been no gunfire coming out of this building. The building is completely engulfed in fire. But he held the fire trucks to make sure they could kill as many people as they could and destroy the evidence with the fire.
Fire planning.
Most of the remaining Davidians were concentrated here in the kitchen dining room area. It was their only way out except for one thing. 2 men outside were firing machine guns at them.
So let's stop right here. The front of the Davidian complex is obviously open to the media and people can see it. You've listened to some of the survivors. All of the survivors come out the front. There were people that tried to come out the back. There were 27 dead bodies found with bullet wounds in them outside of this building, all of them in the back, where no one had any visibility and where there was a sniper nest.
In the 51 days the FBI was involved, they did not fire a single shot. First, that would mean quite certainly that 27 of the people who died in the compound, I think the autopsy report showed 27, I may be off by 1 or 2, who died of bullet wounds. Those were self-inflicted or inflicted by other members within the compound.
These are embers that are flying off the building, but you can see up in here that this is rapid gunfire. when we analyzed the tape, we found out that there's two people there in this area here. And they're firing for about 30 seconds in this area right here where we have the burning dining room area. And it's almost continuous gunfire. And towards the end of this particular section, we find out that the people doing the shooting are actually retreating away from the fire and shooting as they're retreating.
The machine gunning of the Davidians trapped in the burning kitchen dining room was not only visible to congressional investigators, it was even visible to home viewers. So is the gunfire behind the tank smashing into the rear of the gymnasium. Neither was mentioned despite the fact the FLIR tape shown to the Joint Committee had far better clarity than the copy used in this film.
We can see the flames real good from here.
There came a point in my rolling on the floor and trying to protect myself from the heat and being in the pitch black, not able to see, that the voices of those behind me screaming kind of got through to me. I recognized who they were. Could identify the voices. It kind of galvanized me to just leap to my feet and jump or dive headfirst in the general direction of where I figured the hole was. When I stood up, the skin was rolling off my hands. My coat was all melted on my back and smoking. I looked back over my shoulder, and the hole had just come out with a mass of flames. And the first thought that came to me was, I'm the only one.
I feel better if I could go in and got him out without him. They didn't want him to come out. They wanted to kill him.
Fire was just going on and on. We realized nobody came out, thinking maybe my husband didn't get up, but my children got out. Horrible, horrible way to die. I try not to think about it because I keep thinking at some point they felt all that heat. I kept thinking the people in the square, they were the ones who maybe they probably killed Cook to death. I think it was to be this tragedy to show what kind of people we have as a government.
As soon as the Branch Davidian Star David flag had fluttered to the ground, they ran the ATF flag up on that flagpole as a symbol of a military conquest, because the whole world saw this as a symbol that the battle was over.
I love this country. I love the flag. I love saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I still cry at the national anthem. I hope not only law enforcement, but I hope everyone does that. The FBI is not, as we've been labeled for the past 2 years, anti-religious rights or anti-personal rights. We have plenty of freedoms in this country, which I love. We have the freedom to stockpile weapons. I know I'm a Christian. I like practicing my Christian beliefs. I know I'm going to heaven when I die with my kids. I teach in charge of the nursery, used to do Sunday school, youth group leader. If someone tries to stop me from doing that, obviously I'm going to be upset. But that does not give me the right to go kill someone, go to my house using my children as shields and say, I'm not coming out. I've broken the law. I'm not coming out until God tells me to. That is wrong. The hearings have been on for 9 days or so. And I'm going to say this as nicely as I can, because a couple people said, what can we learn from this? In 9 days, I can't learn to be a legislator. In 9 days, y'all can't learn to be law enforcement officers. Byron, Floyd Clark, Jeff Jamar, Dick Rogers, like them or not, or like what we do for a living or not, they've been law enforcement officers, some of them longer than I've been alive. And with that comes a lot of experience. What I'm saying is you have to trust the people in charge at the time.
No, we don't.
I'm low on the food chain, so I'm standing by what they did because I do what I'm told as long as it's legal and moral.
My God, torturing babies and saying it's part of their job and saying it's okay because their parents were bad. Our whole society is structured around the notion that if parents are bad, we protect the children even against the parents. In this case, the FBI and the government took the position, why, not only do we not protect the children, we use it as an instrument to try to get their parents to do something. We'll torture them so their parents will do right. Oh, God, where did they think that up?
We thought that their instincts, the motherly instincts would take place and that they would want their children out of that environment. It appears they don't care that much about their children, which is unfortunate.
The backward bowed corpse of this 8-year-old girl shows what cyanide does to the human body. It makes the muscles contract so violently that they can actually break bones.
If one reviews the various use of cyanide as a method of putting prisoners to death, you note that these people are strapped in their chairs very heavily, and that's not to prevent.
Let me move on to the next little clip. Yeah, not going to be able to get it.
Feel, hold, photograph, observe a great majority of bodies in Waco. I'm left with an overall disturbing kind of haunting opinion that many of the people in the residence were homicide victims.
This is the actual corner.
One of the FBI officials told Dr. Pirwani that they did not want us there because they wanted to do it themselves.
The FBI lab was extremely in a hurry to get the evidence from us, and it took us several weeks to go through literally thousands of rounds. And all the bullets, bullet cartridges, fragments of grenades, they were all turned over to the FBI lab.
No independent examination of any of that evidence has been allowed, including the illegal firearms the FBI says were found in the rubble.
Is that a weapon illegal that you found at the compound?
This is an AK-47 type rifle that has been converted to permit full automatic fire.
Making it illegal?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I was panning the whole site, and one of the rangers came up behind me while I was still taping and hit me on the shoulder and said, "You can't be doing that." And so I said, "Okay, that's fine, no problem." And then he asked for the tape. And I said, "Well, I'm shooting for Dr. Pirwani, and I'm not going to give you the tape until he says it's okay." Finally, we found Dr. Pirwani, talked to him, and he agreed that it was okay for me to give them the tape, so I did. They promised us that all they want to do is review it, and they would give it back to us the next day. And they didn't.
They told us that they misplaced it. At one time, they told us that I have it in my briefcase and I'll give it to you. In fact, we said that we're going to delay giving the reports until you give a tape back. And of course, they said, sure, we'll give you a tape back next time we come to your office. We, in fact, suggested we would go to Waco and collect the tape from them. And they said, no, it's San Antonio office. And at a certain point along this discussion, they finally said, the tape is lost. We can't give it to you.
At this point, is there any doubt in your mind or the Justice Department's mind that the fire was set by the cult members?
I have absolutely no doubt at all that the cult members set it based on all the information that has been furnished to me.
The survivors that came out, their clothes smelled of accelerants. They smelled of diesel fuel. They smelled of lantern fuel. They smelled of lighter fluid. And the laboratory later came back and confirmed that they had done it. I would like to know why key information as to how some of this contamination occurred was omitted from the reports, specifically those survivors who exited the south side of the building. They had to walk through an area that was contaminated by fuel from large tanks spilled by the government tank operations. The thing that really concerns me is why the building was so totally destroyed afterwards, after the fire was out. There was no firefighting whatsoever attempted. And then the crime scene, and it was a crime scene, was totally, absolutely destroyed. And I've seen this happen before.
Did you see the FBI changing the crime scene in any way?
Yes, sir. As I'd said earlier and didn't get to finish the answer, they were moving the vehicles, which destroyed valuable trajectory evidence. And in the end, it turned out didn't matter because the
But it didn't seem to be standard operating procedure. You don't consider that standard operating procedure, do you?
Certainly not in any crime scene I've ever been on. No.
We were commissioned early on in this as Deputy United States Marshals to carry a special commission so that we could prosecute federally anyone that lied to us, and we feel real comfortable, and Captain Burns does, that we were lied to.
Let me be clear. This investigation has not uncovered any evidence of political corruption or influences. We have not found any of that. There was no conspiracy to kill Branch Davidian.
The record of the Waco incident documents mistakes. What the record from Waco does not evidence, however, is any improper motive or intent on the part of law enforcement. David Koresh and the Davidians set fire to themselves and committed suicide. The government did not do that.
That assertion to me that the media and that the government has made a kind of blanket declaration that the Branch Davidians committed, quote, mass suicide, to equate it to a Jonestown, Guyana suicide, is the most irresponsible statement that can be attributed to anything having to do with the Waco incident. And I find it very offending to me and offensive to the memory of the Davidians and everyone else involved in this tragedy to wrap it up in a nice, clean, well, it was just a mass suicide in the story, because it was far from it.
What the people believed that would happen was that God was going to judge either the world or them. If it judged the world.
So that's the preponderance of the video material that we have. So it pretty much paints the scene of what we wanted to portray to you as far as the storyline goes with visuals. Do you have any comment, Bridget?
I'm going to try and do this. Forgive me, everybody. I got a new setup tonight. There's several things that I have to say. One of the biggest things is after you get past the horrific way that our government weaponized for the third time, and you got to remember that this is the same group of people using the same weapons, the same tactics, did it in Ruby Ridge, that did it before Ruby Ridge, that went again, and each time they were getting further until they managed this. All of the preponderance of evidence, when you lay it out on the table, it is impossible to even imagine that they did not plan on ending this entire thing this way. And that they were never trying to protect the children. Everything from the sniper that was involved, the person that was involved, we did a little research on him, and when he was charged for shooting over at Ruby Ridge, and again, he was also used in Waco, the same person that represented him in his trial was the same one who actually represented the man who they were attempting to slaughter in Ruby Ridge. And the only way that couldn't have been a conflict of interest is if they were all on the same side. And there's so much that ties this together. Everything from the people who, one of them that actually continually does the, comes out and speaks and does videos is that Thibodeau, okay? And as it turns out, Thibodeau waited until the very near the end to come out. I believe it was when the fire was going. He managed to get out without, and everyone else was held in prison as a critical witness in the case of Waco. However, that man was able to go home to Maine and stay with his family. And it just so happened he testified against all the other survivors. They attempted to throw the book at all of them that survived the attempt that they did to kill them.
Okay, so let's go there for just a second. In the aftermath of what we just saw, the ones that did make it out the front so that they were on camera and was not sniped or killed, there was 12 of them, right?
Yes.
And they all end up going on trial for murder, as in the government's going to, after they just basically tried to exterminate them, they're going to turn around and put them immediately on trial for murdering the ATF agents from the very first day, which is more than likely were killed by their peers, not by the Davidians. And again, in a completely uncalled for assault, as opposed to just the delivery of a warrant. And so these people stand trial for murder, and they are all acquitted for murder, but they were convicted eventually on lesser charges, and basically end up, at least in some cases, some of them served as many as 12 years in jail for being a victim of the government's aggression.
And they also brought charges, attempted to bring charges against the government for involuntary manslaughter, for a variety of different things, because every lawyer in the world wanted to represent these people, because it was obvious that they were not guilty and that they had suffered, and it was thrown out of court.
Well, not only was it thrown out of court, those survivors sued, and they actually were paid millions of dollars to be the government agents, to be distributed among themselves.
Right.
Yeah, so they got paid for slaughtering people.
Right. They got a bonus. Yeah. They got a bonus at the end. So one of the men who served the longest sentence was not even actually present at all during the siege.
One at the gun show.
He was away at a gun show.
Yeah.
In Dallas.
Yeah.
And so it's just as if one thing's not bad enough. However, when you start dissecting it, there was definitely more going on at Waco, because a lot of the perpetrators of the crime spent too much time in Waco, at the compound, prior to all of this breaking out. It almost has all the earmarks of a sleeper cell that went rogue and
So what
stopped
you're
playing
saying,
ball.
is some of the people, like the informant, that was integrated into the Davidian complex, as well as David's acquaintance with many of the people that were supposedly living next door and known to be government agents, were all working together in some form or fashion, that either because someone got out of line or whatever, they turned on them and was then going to basically, it wasn't really about a warrant in February. It was really about getting rid of the people that are in there, which, when you look at the tactics that were used, number one, at the beginning, because everything was overdone, it definitely, again, was not a normal delivery of a warrant, right? They were going to
Right.
use overwhelming force to the point where they ran out of ammunition, such overwhelming force. And it was only after they ran out of ammunition did they end up at a stalemate.
That was what caused the ceasefire. The
Correct.
ceasefire had, because the Davidians were only when you really scrutinize the video, and there's been lots of people who have over the years, because it was such a badly scripted cover up, it's obvious they were not the aggressors. When the ATF agents first arrived in the cattle cars, those are trailers that are meant to transport cattle. So it's got
Right.
slats in it, which actually has empty spaces in between that are just covered with a tarp. And they said they wanted to do that. This is laughably stupid. This is how stupid they think we are. And they wanted to do it that way so it didn't draw attention. Showing up with 2 cattle trailers unannounced, first of all, did make probably more of a show than it would have if police had shown up, or a bus had shown up, or,
I'm
there's
looking,
just,
I'm looking in my notes. There were 9 survivors, according to this one article.
and there's a lot of conflicting, and that's the other thing that made this such a difficult timeline, even prior to all of the Waco actually breaking out, is all of the different, it's like you really had to scrutinize every detail and cross-reference to actually put together a decent timeline. They have gone back and intentionally corrupted, ran so many false numbers, how many kids came out, when they came out, when the people came out, what their statements were. Everything, the timelines were so hard to put together. Again, if it's the truth, it doesn't change. If it's the truth, the core facts will not change. Maybe different people's accounts may, or there might be slight incongruencies, but when the whole thing comes out as being so bizarrely twisted and getting so much conflict, that's just all the earmarks of hey, got dogs in here playing. Anyway, it has all the earmarks of a lie.
Right.
And the only time they lie is when they're trying to cover something up. And it goes all the way back, everything from the Delta Force. It is so against the law. It's against our Constitution to use, like you had brought up, the posse. You know this better than anybody.
Posse
You
comitatus.
cannot use the military under only extreme circumstances. They claim that this was all about keeping children protected. You slaughtered them all to keep children protected. And the news, just like they always do, covered it up. They read right from the FBI scripts. there was, let's see.
Well, also talking about in the aftermath of what we just witnessed, the media immediately came out and said that Koresh had committed suicide, yet he was actually shot twice in the head. That's kind of hard to do. And there was a lot of speculation, and one of the other videos we watched actually shows a helicopter going around the compound and actually shooting into the compound.
They actually called 911 from inside the compound to say that they were shooting from the helicopters.
Yeah.
And they kept screaming, "We've got women and children here. Stop shooting." You know?
So David Thibodeau, that one that you saw talk often on the video, was the inside informant. And he actually testified to say that law enforcement, as Bridget had already indicated, was not a stranger at Mount Carmel, that they visited often. They were completely aware of all of the contents, as far as them being a arms dealer. So that's very important, especially when you go to the entire setup of the delivery of the warrant.
Now, when you get, and one of the most interesting, and I don't know if I'd say interesting, but hard things to outline on all of this, you know, each of us has, and that's why we make such a good trio, is we all bring different things to this research project. And in this particular case, I'm kind of will dissect something. Every time I would research one person, it would lead to 7 awful connections to 7 different things. I may end up losing my battery here and have to re-click in through my phone. But before I do, one of the things that kept coming up is when you go out towards the Clinton route, you know, the 4 bodyguards that were killed there or the 4 men, the ATF men, were Clinton bodyguards when he was on the campaign trail. Then you've got the go-betweens between Janet Reno and the White House, which was that Foster, who just so happened to commit suicide 2 months after Waco. Then you have Whitaker, who was the lawyer. Oh. Anyway, let me re-sign in. Apparently I'm freezing on their side.
Okay.
The lawyer, one of the files that were missing, 100 pages. But
so we have Vince Foster, who, as Bridget just articulated, commits suicide. The immediate response of the Clinton administration is they send in 3 different people to go through not only his file cabinets, but his safe, and they remove everything that's in his office to include the Waco folder up to the Clinton private quarters. And that's not a coincidence. There's interviews with his wife that basically say that that he was distraught afterwards. And keep in mind, the number 2 guy at DOJ that's involved in all of this was a lawyer with Hillary Clinton at the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, Arkansas. So they brought a lot of the people in the White House and to the DOJ that had been with them in Little Rock. And so this entire cabal of people that are working on this all have some very interesting connections. So I found an article that was written in 2023 Now you just saw the film that shows not only were they injecting a flammable tear gas, that they then launched flashbangs into there to ignite it several hours after they had delivered the flammable tear gas. But I want you to listen to this. This is from a Houston article that was written in 2023 on the 30th anniversary of the event. It still has a statement in it that says the tear gas was not flammable. The entire place burnt down. But they want us to believe 30 years later, they still can't talk. They still can't tell you the truth, because that has been declassified, as I articulated earlier. It was military grade flammable tear gas that was delivered to that, and they afterwards found the flashbangs that was used to ignite the entire place. Also, I want to point out in that video, the ignition of the fire were at all of the exits. So they're talking about how indignant they were that the people didn't just come out. Well, I showed you that they're mowing them down in the back if they tried to escape, and they ignited the 3 exits that were nearest to the largest accumulation of people. Did you have anything else, Bridget, on that?
Sorry about that. Yeah. There was no right way out of this. As far as they finished with the plan. One of the other things that I wanted to bring up that we didn't mention was that there were 3 or 4 points confirmed of the fire starting simultaneously inside the building that was confirmed in some of the Senate testimony. There's a lot of speculation that it wasn't actually the gas that ignited. The gas was there, it was ignitable, but that they actually used nerve gas. Because most of the individuals who ended up getting out during the fire came off of the second story. Most of them came out, literally diving out of the second story. And that the not CS gas, but if it were nerve gas, that would explain how they were able to make it into the compound prior to the fire. And it would explain the 2 bullet holes suicide. There were just so many things. Even the one who did the autopsies came back and said that what he found were not consistent with suicide, your typical suicide. Meaning, again, 2 bullet holes, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So we also have a guy by the name of Gary Nosner. He was actually the initial hostage crisis negotiator for the FBI instead of that pompous ass that we saw later on. However, he was relieved 25 days into the standoff because he adamantly refused to escalate the situation. He would not allow them to do the psyops music and all that other stuff. He would not allow them to do the agitation and the ramping up of things, because he felt like he needed to establish a rapport and a trust in order to be able to get all of the kids out. That obviously was not the way the FBI saw this thing ending. And so they fired that guy and brought the other guy that you saw repeatedly on the video in to take over the hostage negotiation. He was much more aggressive and he was a liar.
Right.
However, here's how sadistic these people are. On April 19th, the guy that they had fired as the hostage negotiator was ordered back to the Waco command post to watch the raid.
They are sick. I mean, and that's what just it gets overwhelming when you try to go through these and not get emotionally
So
involved.
he also was responsible for freeing 35 of the people that were inside the compound during those 25 days. So he was actually making progress.
Yeah.
And obviously that was not the result that they wanted. So
Right.
the guy that is actually negotiating with him and getting hostages out, supposedly hostages out, they fire him. That tells you all you need to know. And then order him to come back and watch them. And we need to mention again that during this time, Timothy McVeigh shows up in Waco.
Coincidentally.
Yeah, coincidentally. Also, there were a guy by the name of Brian Sage, who was an FBI negotiator, and the line FBI agents were constantly fighting with each other as a part of the hostage negotiation behind the scenes, because, well, not even behind the scenes, at least to the Davinians. One guy would promise them something, and the other guy would turn around and countermand that and do the exact opposite. So at no time was the next hostage negotiator allowed to establish any credibility at all with the compound, because no matter what he said to the Branch Davidians, the next guy would go right behind him and countermand what he just promised them that he could deliver.
One of the things that came up during a lot of these videos was that the music and the stuff that they were driving around with the tanks around the compound, blaring music, that was the exact same thing that they did to Noriega to get him to surrender. They even used the same rabbit screams of a rabbit being slaughtered. And one of the things you had brought up at the time was, you said then the same people were involved. And sure enough, once you start digging into these things, you'll start seeing that just constantly. And I can't remember his name. I can't find it in my notes. But anyway, there were also, one of the other things was the Delta team. Apparently 3 of the Delta team, or I believe it was 3, could be 4, out of the Delta team ended up starting to have, they have people that put in mental blocks after a situation, after any kind of, where these snipers go out and they have to do horrible things.
We call it compartmentalization.
And when they tried to do that with these men, apparently it would not hold. And they came forward to testify. They were scheduled to testify in front of Congress. And it was just a few weeks before that all of a sudden and it was Boynton. Thank you, Liza. Boynton, that was the one that was from Noriega. But anyway, just weeks before they were to testify, they all conveniently died in a training accident.
In a training accident.
Right.
All 4 of them.
All 4 of them. Foster, Vince Foster, he had a file, an enormous file, inside of his desk.
Yeah, I mentioned that while you were gone. Yeah, I mentioned it while you were gone.
Sorry.
That's okay.
And everything is just, it's just, when you start adding these up, it is impossible to believe that this was accidental.
Correct.
And the cover-up, the number of people who suicided or had training accidents who were involved, the ones that didn't, the ones that weren't suicided, the ones that weren't, were promoted. Almost every single one of them were promoted repeatedly shortly after Waco, and end up just like that Boynton. He ends up being, I believe, a general near the end by the time he retired.
He did.
And it was just, you see each one of these guys just jump up in rank considerably. That was their payoff. That was their payout. But the links to all these different organizations, you guys, there are tons of these. I've only had a chance to go through a handful of them, and we keep finding more of them. Do some research on this. Run with it. I've gotten this started, but you guys are really good researchers. I've seen you in the chat. You already have the base knowledge, man. Run with it. You'll find articles. You'll find news clippings. If you find one of these guys that, like that Boynton, find out what else they did after Waco. Find out what they were doing before Waco. And you will find they're not really that smart. They use the same people over and over again. Oh, yeah, and there was one guy Liza just brought up, and I have his name. Here we are. That was two guys showed up. Okay, they weren't there at the time that Waco, when the ATF raided. Okay, they were off at work because one of the things, again, the Waco raid started at 10 o'clock in the morning. Two guys show up from work and they try to get back to the compound because their families are back in the compound. And one of them, is it Rodriguez? No. That was one of the undercover agents. Anyway, one of them ended up getting shot in the back 7 times. He was unarmed. He was walking down the road. He was 300 yards from the Waco compound, and he was just trying to get back to his family. They shot him 7 times in the back. They drug his body off the road, left him in a ditch, and left him to rot for 6 days. The other one, I think they detained him and then released him. But one of the biggest things is later on, when the autopsy was done of the man that was drug over and left in the ditch, he was actually shot twice right behind the ear. Double tapped is what Liza keeps bringing up. Double tapped.
Oh, I was like, what does that mean? I saw she said double tapped in the ditch. I'm like, what does that even mean?
Right. And so the question is, why would they shoot somebody 7 times and then 2 shots in the head, and then leave him in the ditch? And they tried to come in and do a forensic autopsy, and immediately the ATF agents came over, said it doesn't matter anymore, and drug him off and contaminated everything.
Okay, so I got the 2 shots in the head.
Okay.
In every Gladio operation that the Mafia / P2 Masonic Lodge was involved in, 2 shots in the head.
Ah, see, and it goes back to, I mean, they just,
or as Liza says, double tap.
Right. And that's what is just insane. You know, these people don't have any kind of imagination. They constantly are rinse, wash, repeat. Here he is.
Okay, let me give a shout out to is it Frey and Boys for your contribution. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for doing that.
Meanwhile, I am going to find this guy.
Okay.
I got him in my notes, but unfortunately I've got like 50 pages of notes.
Yeah.
Getting better,
so
just not
there was a report that was written, a congressional report. It's called the Danforth Final Report. And it basically, part of that report says that it lists the causes of death for the children in the vault as resulting from smoke inhalation and thermal burns, blunt injuries, 1 stab wound to the chest, 4 by gunshot, and 12 with undetermined causes of death. Now, let me just say, if you're only dying because of gas and fire, I'm not sure where gunshot wounds and stab wounds to the chest come into play, but they obviously did. So, and this is in a report that basically at the end of the report says the government did nothing wrong. So, as with most, it does say also in there that at least 20 died from gunshot wounds. But of course, then they say it may have been self-inflicted, which of course, there's more than enough evidence to suggest to you that that is not true. Also, this is where it talked a little bit about 11 members were tried in 1994, which is the year after, on various charges. Hey, Bridget, mute your mic while you're doing that.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
On various charges, including conspiracy, murder, and weapons charges. We told you that they were acquitted on the murder charges. 3 defendants were found not guilty on all charges, while all were cleared of conspiracy and murder accusations. 7 were found guilty of aiding and abetting the voluntary manslaughter of federal officials, which, again, the one guy wasn't even there. He was at a gun show, which is ridiculous. The kind of mousy guy that you saw testifying throughout that video, that's the guy that was at the gun show in Austin and wasn't even there. 7 were served time for arms violations, which, as Bridget articulated, it was a $200 fee. That entire line of BS, which of course is how they began the entire raid, was because of the supposed illegal arms. Kind of at that point is ridiculous. So 8 defendants were sentenced to between 5 and 40 years, but all had been released by the mid 2000s. Brad, let's see, who had left the residence earlier in the siege, also ended up in prison. Brad Branch, who he actually testified that the entire purpose of the flames or the fire was to destroy evidence in the Davidian compound. And that kind of goes back to what Bridget was saying. So if I was into conspiracies and not just the facts, I would say, considering the one guy that they murdered early on in the story, George Rosen shot and killed the one guy. That guy was known to go to South America a lot. I mean, a whole lot. And then you have something so important in this compound that it was worth the government burning the entire thing down and killing all these people to hide. You could speculate a lot around this entire storyline. Because, and again, you've got this guy traveling internationally all over. He's going to London, he's going to Israel, and he's going to Australia a lot. And that is not a normal American. It's not a normal American that is supposed to be this kind of recluse that you can't even serve a warrant to, and has a very traditional, from an outward perspective, Christian lifestyle, absent the whole marrying young kids part of it, as far as him being into a religious order. There's just nothing about this. And then, like, on everything that you know is a scam, they immediately go in there and they don't just bulldoze down the remains of the fire structures. They go down and dig the dirt out and basically distribute the entire subsurface as if to get rid of any of the residue on the ground as well. I mean, this was a total cleanup job after the fact. All right, Bridget, what else you got?
Okay, I've got his name, Michael Dean Schroeder. Coincidental, and this is why I say every time I start digging into one thing, I end up with 7 snakes slithering out. It just so happened that his wife made it out. She ended up coming to their belief system. She had a 3-year-old daughter that was released. She supposedly was in there and was planning on killing herself, but then at the last minute decided to come out and be completely forthcoming with all of the officials, telling them everything about what she saw and did and everything about what was going on inside the compound. And these people are just not, they're more like characters in a book than they are in a badly written book.
So are you
basically,
Ruth, are you trying to say that she like turned state's evidence and was saying incriminating things about the compound?
I think there were, okay, they said before there was a lot of people that were plants. There were a lot of FBI plants inside. They only came out with the name of one of them. And actually, the only reason his name came out was because they threw him under the bus. And he came out and started screaming at the top of his lungs that they are trying to use him as a scapegoat. And that was Robert Rodriguez.
Right.
But Ruth Riddle was another one. Ruth Riddle came out. There's a bizarre, twisted mother, daughter, sister, children, and all this. But she comes running out at the very last second with a floppy disk. My question is, I wonder what was in the floppy disk. There's just, there were, they said, many undercover agents within the compound, but we don't know exactly who they were, how many were there. Again, sounds again like the January 6th. They're all dressed like Davidians, they all talk like Davidians, but in the end, some serious scrutiny needs to come about with the adult survivors. Even though many of them were acquitted, maybe there's a reason why they were acquitted. It goes back to David Thibodeau, who came out. He was another one that supposedly didn't share their beliefs. He was on again, off again, in the compound, in the group, not in the group. And that
He's
morning,
the drummer.
Right. And he went out to have breakfast that morning and accidentally missed when the deal was raided. I mean, there's just, this just doesn't pass the mustard. All you have to do is use your critical thinking, and these people stick out like sore thumbs. But and again, the connections between Watergate, the Clintons, Waco, Oklahoma bombing, it's just, they are direct lines, and it's all there. Nobody's gone. Everybody who has done investigations on Waco always gets overwhelmed by the emotions that are brought up when you really realize our government went to that extent to eradicate these people, and that they waited 51 days. The only reason, and I keep going through this, the only reason I can find for them to have waited, because they could have blown this up anytime during those 51 days. There were 2 apparent things. They were monitoring their water because they had a big water reservoir in the back, and they wanted to make sure that it was completely empty before they ended the siege. Is it because they didn't want them putting out the fires? I don't know. Is it because there was something hidden in the bottom of that? There's too many unanswered questions yet. And, you know, as soon as they burnt that and they burned it down to the foundation, they came in with sawzalls to bring the people out. One of the things, the tanks, you know, that you talk a lot about the tanks. One of the way the compound was set up, there was a tunnel that led to a bunker underground. In that bunker underground is where a lot of the women and children went early on. The tank, when it went over to demolish that tower, it was what do they call it? Wiggling. It's a dancing or something, right back and forth, right over where that tunnel was. They knew where that tunnel was. They had been in the tunnel.
Correct.
The intention was to trap those people in that underground compound. That was the only reason.
So I want to bring up a news article that was written in Dallas, and it was out on the UPI wire. It's I'm going to quote this. 2 U.S. Army Delta Force technicians say they were at the 1993 Branch Davidian siege only to assist with surveillance equipment and did not get involved in the deadly final assault. The Dallas Morning News reported on Friday. The 2 unidentified Special Forces members made the statements in deposition taken last month in Washington by lawyers for the surviving Branch Davidians who have filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the U.S. government. The lawyers and other critics of the FBI's handling of the situation have suggested that the members of the Delta Force team might have been involved in the final assault. Fires broke out as tear gas was being injected into the compound by the FBI, and more than 80 Davidians died. Quote, to the best of my knowledge, nobody that I was there with ever entered nor ever even came close to the compound, said one Delta Force sergeant. They're snipers. They don't have to get close, just as a heads up. The Delta Force soldiers said that they were at Waco primarily to assist the FBI in the use of some special surveillance hardware. They said there were only 3 members of their unit on the site during the final 5 days of the 51-day siege. The 2 soldiers testified behind screens and said their Delta Force unit was so secretive that they could not do so in person. So that tells you unequivocally. And this guy is talking about his team. They're 4-person teams. He did not in any way suggest there wasn't another Delta team, because that came out later on that there were 2 teams there, plus those 2, the colonel and the general.
Absolutely. And that was so against, that was like overstepping not just by an inch. They overstepped and absolutely trampled the Constitution in everything they did during Waco, and they publicized it. A complete psychological operation, I think, to see if they could sell a lie to the American people that was big enough that they could control enough of the news coverage. Now, one of the things was all the news coverage, all the newspaper reporters, the video cameras, everything was only allowed one angle and from long distance away. So they were not able to see the back of the compound where they were mowing people down as they fled from the scene, as they fled out of the compound. As you put it, 27 bodies.
And obviously, one of the suggestions early on by obviously people they didn't listen to was basically just secure a fence around it.
Yeah,
they
even
there.
Right.
They had already turned off all of the utilities. They had no water. They had no electricity. They had nothing. So eventually, they're going to come crawling out.
Right.
And you are left with one conclusion and one conclusion only. There were 20 different nonviolent ways to resolve this. 20. You could have put a fence around it, put a sentry or 2 around there, and waited for them all to come out.
Right.
And they chose to murder American citizens,
including mostly women and children. That's the one thing.
Women and children.
When they didn't do the raid early in the morning, what ended up happening is that allowed all of the men to leave to go to work, because a lot of these people had regular jobs. The one guy was a post office, worked as a postman. Another guy worked at an engine shop. Their intention was to kill women and children, predominantly. Now, again, a lot of the men inside of there, a lot of the women and children inside of there, it sure sounds a lot like an MK Ultra mind control, the mind control that he displayed on his parishioners inside that courtroom that day, that they would not budge until
Oh,
he
and
said
we
the word.
haven't mentioned, we haven't mentioned yet that the guy that we saw on the video doing the infrared flare, whatever it's called, analysis, he conveniently died right before he was supposed to give congressional testimony.
Right. And that allowed them to say it was uncontested, that it was just a reflection of the sun or something along that, a shiny reflection surface instead of gun flash, muzzle blast.
Correct.
And stuff like that. They did mop it up. I mean,
they definitely did. So we're coming up on our second hour. I don't know if you have anything else. Did you have any other big?
Not really, not at this time. But, this is one of those things that is continuing and expanding and growing. I'm still looking for the link back through time, because I believe this links to individuals. There's too much. They're working too hard to cover this up.
Yeah, I mean, when you go 30 years out and you're still lying about it,
well,
that's a little odd.
Right. And I'll give you one better. And this is to show you how bad the cover-up is. Liza, one of the great things she found was she ended up finding a post on a 24-hour blog, campfire website, where people were just chatting. I mean, they weren't chatting about anything anyway. They got to bringing up, this was in, I think, 2020. Don't quote me on that, but it was recent.
Okay.
And they were talking about the sniper, that lawn,
the one that was at Waco and Ruby Ridge.
Right.
Yeah.
And who was charged, and then the charges were dropped on him shooting the wife that was holding the baby.
Yep.
And while he was typing in this blog, the FBI raided his home. Okay? They didn't do anything to him. They just turned over his house. He got back on the blog afterwards and said, "You're not going to believe this." Now, it could be a lie. It could be, but it wouldn't surprise me. And that, again, this tells me that they're trying awfully hard, even 30 years later, to keep a lid on this. That means there's even more to this, and more information that is damning to someone who's currently alive and active.
I agree. And so now that we know that there's a big open question mark on this, then we will all keep our eyes out, and we know where to find each other. So we will share any additional information that we come across as it relates to this that we might find on obscure websites. So that's what we got for you tonight. We are going to start our new book, which I don't have with me. I already posted it on Truth Social and on X. So we will be starting that Sunday night. I look forward to, Liza, patterns. Notice patterns. And I will see you back here on Sunday night. Just for all of you that may not be aware, we are doing an hour or two each day around noontime, not hard fast noon, but around noontime on X Spaces about the background of Operation Gladio. And we've got one more historical perspective show that we're going to do tomorrow. And then we're going to start doing kind of a country by country look at some of the Gladio operations. So just wanted to let you know. SR71, her house is fake. That was a backdrop. FYI.
We were joking earlier about the baby grand piano that was in the background.
That's what he says.
Yeah.
He says, you have a lovely home. It's fake.
It's fake. I'm a country girl, you know.
Yeah.
But don't forget to hit the thumbs up, everybody, because that spreads the word. The more thumbs up we get, the more views this gets, the more it is recommended when people go searching, and that helps everything. The more
That's
people
true.
get Gladio glasses, the less people can hide.
Yes. Please give us a follow and a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. Thanks for being here. And good night, all.